Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. On today's episode of Homestead Coffee Talk, we are answering the question, are grow zones the only thing that matters? Thank you for joining me today. Grab your coffee, tea, water, whatever you're drinking this morning, and let's dive into this topic of conversation. Grow zones are probably something that you've at least heard of, even if you don't have a lot of familiarity with it. So just to give you a little bit deeper overview, if you are not super experienced with grow zones, there's something that you're going to hear a lot of people talk about and have discussions around. Basically, the USDA has divided out the United States into 13 grow zones. Each of these zones has has two subzones. So you have like a 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, so on and so forth. And these zones were put together because of the minimum average winter temperature. So they looked at over, I think it was a span of 30 years, they'll take the minimum average winter temperature for that area, and that is how they determine what your grow zone is. I guess there has been a little bit of change over time, just depending on how some of the weather patterns have changed, and maybe that minimum temperature has changed as well. So why are grow zones important? Really, grow zones can be helpful in determining which plants are most likely to thrive in your location and which plants are most likely to survive throughout the course of the winter. If we're looking at your minimum average winter temperature, that's going to make a big difference. If you have a plant that is, let's say, hardy to grow zone 10, where it's going to be a little bit warmer in the winter time, and you live in grow zone 8, that plant is not likely to make it through the winter in your grow zone. If you were just to put it outside and all other things being equal, it's not as likely to survive in that environment. Now, you might be able to make some accommodations depending on what it is, but just in general, if you were gonna plant it outside, no extra accommodations, it's less likely to survive in that lower grow zone. This can be really helpful when you're trying to find which seeds are going to work best in your area or which plants are going to work best in your area. And this can be a great place to start. We want to know if something is going to be able to survive in our area. You might have also heard this referred to as the hardiness zone. So sometimes people will talk about cold hardy plants or plants that are hardy in this environment. A lot of times people will use those two terms interchangeably. So if you've heard of hardiness zones or grow zones, those two things are talking about the same item, just they might use different terms interchangeably. As I was thinking more about this, I've always wondered why it is that here in the Pacific Northwest, where I'm at, we're grow zone 8, but how come other places in, let's say, parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, some of those places are also grow zone 8. And it was really puzzling to me on how we can be the same grow zone, and yet a lot of things that people can plant further south and things that will thrive and do well there, we could never grow that here. It's not something that's going to do well here. And so I wondered, why is that? How are these grow zones helpful to me then, if in the South, it doesn't mean the same thing as here where I live in the Pacific Northwest? So as I was looking into this a little bit more, looking at grow zones is a great place to start, but if you live in the Pacific Northwest or any of the Western states, it might not be the most helpful tool for you to use. It gives you a general basic idea, but it's not the be all end all. We don't have the same length of day as southern states. We don't have the same summertime temperatures as southern states. And that all plays a role and really impacts how different plants are going to do and how they're going to thrive throughout the course of the summer. So thinking about that and kind of researching that, there is something called the sunset climate zones. And this was something that was a little bit newer to me, even though this is something that has been out for many, many years. And what they've done with the sunset climate zones is they have taken and divided the United States into a 24 zone climate system, which is a little bit different than the grow zone. So grow zones, basically the only factor that they're looking at is your minimum average winter temperature. And so they're really looking at the lows, but then with the sunset climate zones, they're taking into account more of those environmental factors that play a role in whether or not a plant is going to do well in that area. It was originally devised for the 13 Western states because of the fact that our situation is a little bit different. We have a very temperate climate, which makes it great for being able to grow, but the problem is we have shorter days. Our summers are not as warm as other places, and those factors play a role in what we're able to grow here. So looking at the climate zones, it kind of breaks things down a little bit more to that region and to that specific area. So it takes into account not only some of those minimum winter temperatures, but also some of the maximum summer temperatures as well. They look at the number of days that an area averages over 86 degrees, for example. In the South, some of those areas that are grow zone 8 are getting over 120 days of temperatures over 86 degrees, whereas here I think we have 13 or something like that. So we just typically don't get that same level of heat. We also have shorter days, particularly in the winter, early spring. And so that plays a factor as well. So it looks at those weather patterns where you have humidity, rainfall, and the heat, that the highs and the lows, and how those come into play and affect plants. It also looks at environmental factors such as wind, day length, soil type, and things of that nature. All of those together are combined, and that's where they've devised the climate zones. When I started digging into this a little bit more, it really made a lot of sense because, like I already said, there are some things that just don't do well here, even though we're the same zone as someplace else. And so we have to take those things into consideration. If I want to get maximum production from some of my vegetables, they have to be started indoors a little bit earlier than you would expect. You have to start things so that they can get growth on them before they go outside and are transplanted, because we want them to be transplanted at peak time so that they will have opportunity to produce. So a lot of items you'll notice as we kind of go throughout the course of the year are going to be started indoors for that reason. The other thing that can be really helpful here when we're looking at the climate zones is the length of days that it takes to for the plant to fully mature and bear whatever it is that it's going to bear, fruit or whatever vegetable, seed, whatever it is that you're expecting to get. Some of those plants take many days, like some of them can take 100 days from transplanting until they're going to fully mature, and that might not be something that's suitable here, because depending on where you purchase your seeds from, that item might be 100 days on average for grow zone 8, let's say. Well, 100 days in Texas is not the same as 100 days in Washington, and they're very, very different. So you have to actually add on a few more days before it's going to come to full maturity. That's why sometimes when you plant something that says it's going to be okay for grow zone 8, it's not actually going to do well, because either it didn't get started early enough in the house, or it just is going to take too long to come to maturity to actually do what it needs to do here. Or also kind of going along with that, it might require more days of extended high temperatures that we just don't see here. That's one of the reasons why I like to purchase seeds that are from an area close by to where I live, or closer. We don't have some place that's right next door, but we do have some places that we like to purchase some that are very similar in grow zone and also in climate zone. And that can help those items to be a little bit more successful in your area. Ultimately, the most successful seeds and plants come from seed that you're able to save on your own property. We have found much greater success with seed that's actually been saved from plants that were grown here, even versus plants or seeds that have been purchased from other areas. So ideally, it would be nice to save seed from here. But again, when we consider the shortened time frame, not everything is going to be easy to save seed from, just because for some items, it takes a really extended period of time to be able to reach that level where seeds are able to be saved. All of this to say that when you are considering which plants you want to put into your garden, there are a number of factors that you really want to consider. Grow zone is helpful, and that's a great place to start, but it's not the only factor. And you might want to consider some of these other things as you are getting ready to plan your garden. If you know exactly what is going to be good in your area, then stick with that. And if you want to experiment with something else, then experiment with something on the side. But you want to have a few staples that you know are going to do really well in your area, because if you experiment with everything, you're going to potentially run the risk of having a garden failure. And then, especially if you're new, it can be easy to become discouraged and think that you're just not good at it. It didn't have anything to do with the way that you were caring for the plants, but more to do with the selection of plants that you chose for your area. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're not sure what's going to be good for your area, see if you might have a master gardeners group in your area, or maybe there's a local farm that is selling items from their farm, and see if you can take an opportunity to just go and chat with them about some of the different varieties that they have seen working well in your area. That might be a great way to figure out where to start. And then, like I said, you can expand out from there. But I know I have had times where I've looked at something and I've wanted to plant it, and I've talked about this a little bit before, and I'm like, why is it that this says it should be good for here, but no one around here is planting this particular item? Why can't we make that happen? For instance, melons. A lot of the melons take an extended grow season, and we just don't have that heat and length of day to be able to make that happen. So we have selected a shorter time period to maturity variety that we're going to go ahead and try for this year, and we're gonna see if it works. But that's kind of our experiment, and we know going into it that it might or might not be successful, just based on the fact that we don't have the best area for melons or things of that nature. So I hope today's conversation was helpful for you. I will link down below to the map for grow zones, so you can just type in your zip code, and that will help pop up with your grow zone and your area. So that'll give you a good starting place. And then I'm also going to link below to the sunset climate zones so that you can take a look at that as well, especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest or along the western side of the United States. And I hope that that can also help you just to think about things a little bit differently, and maybe deepen your understanding of what types of plants might be good for your area. If today's conversation was helpful, don't forget to click like, and we would love to have you subscribe and become part of our community here. Until next time, bye everyone.